If you're a healthcare professional striving to provide culturally competent care, you'll love the show Healthcare for Humans. It's a show hosted by Dr. Raj Sundar, a family physician and community organizer. On Healthcare for Humans, he dives into how understanding cultural practices and beliefs improves patient outcomes. He shares powerful stories and insights like how clinicians can navigate the gaps between their expertise and the values of their patients to create better healing experiences. Listen and follow Healthcare for Humans on your favorite podcast app. Find all the links at healthpodcastnetwork.com/humans. That's healthpodcastnetwork.com/humans.
But the other 50% that are just like, hey, we're not going to help you with NCLEX, but we will give you, this review that you paid for because, they teach it better than we do. And that's okay. But then, a lot of these reviews are just, PowerPoint doing questions. They may go over strategies, they may not, but it really exposes the student, the review, and the school on how well, a student will do on this exam.
What's it like to fail the NCLEX? And how can we best help new graduates succeed when it comes to approaching the NCLEX in a sane, healthy, effective, and a successful way, even when major setbacks occur? Let's talk all about it with nurse educator, author, speaker, and proud veteran Kevin Gibson, right here on episode 511 of The Nurse Keith Show. Hey there, this is Nurse Keith. This podcast is always about you and your personal professional development, your career, and the healthcare system writ large. And I'm here to share education, ideas, and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, medicine, entrepreneurship, and beyond. I love having you along for the ride, and I thank you from the bottom of my nurse podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. If you'd like to help other people find the show, leave a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts, and you can also share the show with anyone who you think might enjoy it or get something out of it. And no matter how you're interacting with us here at the Nurse Keith Show, including listening right now, we thank you for being here. Please head over to nursekeith.com to find the show notes for this episode. The show notes can also be found in any app where you happen to find yourself listening. And as I said today, we are here with Kevin Gibson. He is a nurse educator, author, speaker, a proud veteran, and an NCLEX expert. And Kevin, it's great to have you here. And I want to start by asking you this question. What percentage of people do you know or do you think fail the NCLEX when they take it?
Well, according to the statistics, first-time test takers pass it 91%, according to September, not September, but for all of 2024, it was a 91% pass rate for first-time test takers. Now, the 91% are there, but where are the other 9%? So those are the people that I really speak to the most. But first-time test takers, 91%.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I was part of that 9%. I failed the NCLEX the first time I took it. It was demoralizing. It was upsetting. I couldn't believe it. I mean, even people in my class who did much, much worse than I did on tests and did worse than me in, many aspects of our education at nursing school passed. And it was a really awful experience, but I had no choice but to turn it around, because what else can you possibly do if you don't pass the test?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you don't have a license, you can't take care of patients. And, myself included, I failed the NCLEX 3 times and I passed on the 4th. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the listeners are just like, oh my goodness, he failed it 3 times. Like what made you decide to keep going? And, in the military, like I said, I'm a proud veteran. I was in the Navy for 16 and a half years. And the one thing is, we don't make excuses. We don't quit. We keep fighting. And who am I to quit when I know I have a lot riding on this? And I always had it in my mind that if I can quit on myself, I can very easily quit on somebody else. And that's not anything that I want to, that's not any type of legacy that I want to leave behind for anyone that's going to be following in those footsteps.
Right. What do you think are the factors from your perspective as an educator, as someone who's really studied the NCLEX and you kind of know what it is that makes us all tick or not tick as
right.
if you think about the circumstance of taking a standardized test. So what is it that causes some of us, myself included, to not pass? Like, what are the factors that you think are the biggest ones that we have to overcome?
Well, the very first one, it's a mindset thing,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much writing on it, as well as the amount of things that are said to you at the beginning. They're like, hey, you need to pass the NCLEX. And this is, I'm giving it from the perspective of a lot of educators. I'm speaking from personal experience while I was in nursing school, as well as testimonials from other students that I've had and I've coached in the past. You have a lot of those instructors that are just like, well, you want to pass in 85 questions. You don't want to fail. But then what about where's the what if? So the thing that makes us tick, it's the mindset of thinking like, if I fail, then it's all over for me. And then if I fail, there's no recovering. Or, we'll say within our profession or some societal norms, or even people that are not in the profession, they say to you, if you can't pass that exam, you shouldn't be a nurse. Or if you have to take the exam multiple times, you shouldn't be a nurse. Or you took the exam 3 times, I wouldn't want you being my nurse.
Mm-hmm.
So, it comes from, it starts at the beginning, and then you'd be very surprised on how it trickles upwards, as you start to gain more knowledge within the profession. So the very first thing I would say would definitely be the mindset. And that segues into your ability of actually knowing the proper way to study, because there is strategy on how to understand the question, understand what the question is asking you, and then picking, and I'm pretty sure you can agree with this, the most right answer. Because with a multiple choice question, you can have 2 that don't make any sense, 2 that do make sense, but one that makes more sense than the other. And that would
Mm-hmm.
be your correct answer. So it's all about strategy. And what I've noticed, especially since COVID happened, is these schools are just rushing. And I'm not speaking for all schools, but a lot of the schools are just rushing them through, pipelining them through the process, and not really taking the time to actually help structure, really good study sessions, or even make it, very relevant for people to understand. So
Mm-hmm.
that's been my observation, coaching, students over the last 5 years and studying it for the last 7.
Yeah. And, if I think back to my associate degree program and I think back to exams, right? I was never a good test taker. I I was kind of a B student. Like I could get a test score. It was always like somewhere around 81 to 85, generally in the low 80s. Like that's kind of where I landed through the entire 2 years. I could not get my score higher no matter what I did. I was in a study group. I had really good people I studied with. We met several times a week for hours. We did practice tests, and I studied and studied and studied and studied, and I could not get my test scores into the 90s. Like I just couldn't do it no matter what I did. And I think because of that struggle that I had throughout school, those entire 2 years, I when I first approached the NCLEX that first time, I was so anxious. Like, talk about mindset. Like, I was so worried because I just couldn't, like, I couldn't, there was some like magic place I couldn't get past, and I would watch other members of my class, score like a 95, a 96, a 98, time after time after time. And I was like, what's the secret? So I feel like I never quite cracked the code, but I made it, and I was good clinically. So I wasn't worried about my actual like skill with patients. So what do you do when you're in that position where you just feel like you're just not a good standardized test taker, and how do you make a shift so that you're not worried all the time? Because I feel like that worry is part of the problem, isn't it?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's the fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
You can use so many, you know, reviews that are out there, but until you actually like know, like putting yourself in that experience, then, it's just going to be, a new thing. So what I like to tell my students is first thing I say is to know thy enemy. And this is a term that, I adopted while I was in the service. And, one of the biggest things that we do before any type of deployment, we do a thing called workups. And you could do this when you are forward deployed on a ship. You can do this when you are with Greenside with the Marine Corps, or if you're in the Army or in the Air Force, wherever. And essentially you train to where you are going to go. So, for example, if you're in Afghanistan and you know that you're going to be in the deserts of Helmand Province, then you're going to be training in the desert to recreate the deserts of Helmand Province. Mm-hmm. And so I say the same thing. Hey, we know that our exam is going to be at least 85 questions. So why don't you do at least 85 questions? Who's telling you to do 50? Who's telling you to do 20? Who's telling you to not be consistent? You need to be training to the exam. You know that you're not going to get any more than 150 questions. So why would you not train to that? You know that you are going to be in a testing center. You know you can't have your phone, you can't have drinks, you can't have snacks, you can't have anything. If they could tell you how many times to breathe in a minute, they probably would when you're at a testing center. So if you know what that testing experience is going to be like, that actually can alleviate a lot of the anxiety, because when you get there, you're going to be like, I had already prepared for this.
Okay.
So the more that you're prepared especially when it comes to environment, I think that can help alleviate a lot of your anxiety going into the exam.
So are you saying even down to the nitty gritty, like if you're going to sit and do test questions, don't have snacks, don't have a drink,
yes,
don't have your phone, don't have your books open, and you kind of recreate the situation to the best of your ability so that your brain starts to kind of get what it's going to be like, and you put yourself in that situation over and over again.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because when you get there, it's not going to be new.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be a new thing. I even tell some of my students is do an 85 question quiz. Make sure that it is timed and it is untutored. Why? Why do I tell you to do 85 questions? And they'll tell me because the minimum is 85. Great. Now, why do I tell you to leave it timed? They'll be like, because our exam is timed. And I'm like, also great. Now, why would I tell you to leave it untutored? Doesn't matter what you're using. They'll be like, oh, because on NCLEX, they don't tutor you. And I was like, exactly. NCLEX is not going to let you answer a question and then give you content and rationale so you can go back and look at it. So why would you not train that way? And they're like, oh, that makes so much more sense. You would think it would be simple, but the anxiety of not knowing and then having someone who has been through that experience, even if it's one time and they pass on the first time, and then telling them that is a really great test taking strategy. It's not always about the questions. It's not always about the content. Mm-hmm. It very much can be about the environment, and for the fact that the environment is intimidating. So if you can recreate that to make it less intimidating, the better control you can have over your anxiety.
Right. Now, I've often thought about and talked about how, nursing school is generally focused on the NCLEX because they want you to pass the exam because it does reflect on the school, right? The percentage of their graduates who pass the NCLEX, blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. So schools do teach to the exam, and that's part of their job. And we could all criticize that and say that we should be learning more soft skills, et cetera, and that may be true. However, we still need to pass this test, however you feel about it. Uh-huh. So how do you feel in general? How are schools doing in terms of the evolution of the NCLEX, keeping up with the changes that are coming, because it's always evolving? Uh-huh. And do you feel like students right now in 2025, are they being prepared well in general, or are there places where schools are falling down?
I would say it's about a 50-50. Disclaimer, not all schools are created equally. I'm going to say that again. Not all schools and their programs are created equally. But I have seen it's about a 50-50 split. Some schools don't help them with NCLEX. They help them pass and graduate, but then other schools incorporate, NCLEX practice, from the beginning of nursing school. And I am a very, very big proponent of, hey, learning and understanding what the NCLEX is at the beginning. That way it is not new to you when you get to that testing center to sit for your licensing exam. And do I feel like that students are being prepared? The 50% that are going to the schools that are helping them, yeah. But the other 50% that are just like, hey, we're not going to help you with NCLEX, but we will give you, this review that you paid for because, they teach it better than we do. And that's okay. But then, a lot of these reviews are just, PowerPoint doing questions. They may go over strategies, they may not, but it'll really expose the student, the review, and the school on how well, a student will do on this exam.
Mm-hmm. And, what about culture, language, where you're coming from? We have a lot of international students. Do you work with students for whom maybe English is a second language? And does that add additional challenges that some people find difficult to overcome? Or do you feel like people still do well if they practice and do the type of preparation that you recommend?
So I 100% have and still coach currently many students that English is their second language. Some is Spanish, some is French. I coach a student who lives in Nepal, and I'm like, isn't that where Mount Everest is? And they're just like, yeah. And I'm like, wow, because they want to come to the United States and work as a nurse. English is definitely a challenge for them, because what they'll do is that they'll read it in English, translate it to their native language, and then try to understand it. But then they're not able to understand and comprehend what the question is asking, because whatever they're trying to translate into their language is not making sense. So that is definitely a challenge. And I have turned students away, and I said, hey, you have to get very proficient at your English. Mm-hmm. I specifically can't help you with that. However, there are programs out there that can help you with that. And I'm sorry to tell you, but the NCLEX is in English, and you have to know English in order for you to really understand with this exam. They don't take it any other way. They know it's just a part of the process, and they know that they have to work extra hard in order for them to, pass this exam, because English is not their first language. Mm-hmm. So I most definitely do go through that. And I'm very supportive in letting them know and being very honest with them, like, hey, you're not ready for this exam because of your lack of understanding due to your language. Not about the fact that you don't understand the content, but it's your language that's making it harder for you to understand and answer the questions correctly.
Right. And, there are criticisms of the NCLEX in terms of how it doesn't necessarily address, or how can it really, if you think about it, how can it address your real world bedside skills? Like when I failed the NCLEX that first time, a lot of my colleagues were really shocked, because at graduation, I won the award for clinical excellence, right? Mm. So I was singled out by my professors for being really great in the clinical space. So, that was really shocking to people. It was shocking to me. And that question arises, like, does it really reflect your actual skill when you're there with a patient? And, there's a lot of memorization involved. There's also what you mentioned, the strategy of just, can you read the question correctly? And does it really reflect what you actually do when you're with a patient? Not necessarily. Right. But how do we get over that sense of almost like resentment that people have, that the standardized test doesn't reflect what we actually know and what we know we're capable of?
Right. So to be completely honest, I don't think that the NCLEX is no longer and probably since the beginning, but no longer viable when it comes to taking care of a patient, because when you take care of a patient, it is all hands-on. Mm-hmm. Yes, you have to have the knowledge, and you get the basic knowledge from school. The NCLEX shows that, yeah, you're capable of being able to recall and memorize and use critical thinking, but you really don't put that into practice until you see it firsthand. Like the first time I saw somebody have a STEMI, I'm just like, okay, This is what the book said, but it doesn't give you that real world feeling of like, oh my God, somebody's having a STEMI.
Mm-hmm.
And so do I think that it is relevant? Still, yes. And I say yes, partly because of the case studies, because the case studies give you a lot more information. There's a lot less guessing if all the information is being given to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing I was talking to another colleague about this is I wish that the NCLEX was more like how doctors and surgeons do their board certification, such as they do their written portion, but then they also do the practical portion, and they have to pass both of them in order for them to work as a board certified surgeon or physician or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what's the best way? Like, you can literally take all the most common disease processes that we would see in the hospital from the nursing standpoint, DKA, myocardial infarction, whatever it may be, GI bleeds, and, put the students or the candidates through that scenario. And if they hit all the checks in the box, in order for them to pass, boom, they get their license. Now, I know there's a lot of logistics and there's a lot of political things that will go into that. But I really, truly think that putting people in the kinesthetic environment where they can actually touch the patient, mannequin,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it be, put them through the scenario, I really think it would give people more perspective on, hey, not only how important your critical thinking is, how important it is in real time, but how important it is as you go forth with this license, taking care of real patients.
Right. I mean, just imagine if you got your driver's license by taking a written test and you never had to do a road test. And no one actually knew if you were capable of driving a car, but you could answer the questions really well. So,
Yeah.
And in nursing, obviously, and medicine, we're taking care of real life people, and in sometimes, not always, but life and death situations. So it's a pretty critical thing to be able to actually do what it is that says on paper.
Yeah.
However, we can't necessarily ourselves change the way the test is given, and we just have to take this at face value because it's what it is. But, when we come back from the break, I want to talk some about you. I want to talk about your career, your experience, your book, and then talk a little bit about the future of the NCLEX and what you feel is coming, and the ways people can be prepared and help their colleagues prepare for the exam. So when we come back for the second half of episode 511, we'll talk more with Kevin Gibson. He is a nurse educator, author, speaker, and a proud veteran. And we will be right back with the second half of episode 511 of the Nurse Keith Show. Hey everyone, let's take a quick pause for the cause, shall we? If you're in need of personalized, holistic career coaching to elevate your nursing and healthcare career, look no further than nursekeith.com and Nurse Keith Coaching. I can help you with your job search and interview strategies, resume and cover letter optimization, LinkedIn maximization, and envisioning the future of your career. I can also support you in launching your own business, learning how to write and blog as a side hustle, or launch your own podcast. And please note that you can receive 10% off your first coaching package if you mention the show. So email me at keith@nursekeith.com to schedule a complimentary 30-minute strategy session. Now, let's get back to the episode at hand. And welcome back to the second half of the episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my new friend and colleague, Kevin Gibson. He is also known as the Boot Nurse, and you can find him at thebootnurse.com. And Kevin, first I want to talk about your career. You mentioned being in the Navy. And how many years did you serve?
I served 16 and a half years in the Navy. Yeah, I did. I know a lot of people are just like, why didn't you just stay until you're retired? And listen, when you know it's your time to go, you know it's your time to go. But I did 14 years on active duty, and then I did 2.5 years on the Navy Reserve side. And then I officially separated from naval service January of 2024.
Wow. And what have you been doing as a nurse? Like, where have you found yourself in the clinical space for the most part?
For the most part, I've kind of just floated to a couple of areas. I started out in the ICU. My very first nursing experience as an RN was in a burn ICU in San Antonio, where I actually got to intern because I knew who the nurse educator was. She pulled some strings and she got me my first nursing experience in the burn ICU. And it was absolutely incredible. The people that are there are incredible. And I wanted so bad to work there. But, I had to jump through some hoops that I wasn't ready for at that moment. So I ended up leaving the burn ICU with 6 months of nursing experience. And I landed in a medical ICU at one of the local hospitals in my area. And with that, I was just churning and burning, working as an ICU nurse. This was during the second wave of COVID, and anybody who has worked as a nurse, especially in ICU, ER, actually, matter of fact, it doesn't matter anywhere as a nurse, you knew and know how crazy it was around that time. But I got burnt out. I got burnt out as an ICU nurse, with combined time of, a year and about a year and 4 months. So I wanted to do something different. I ended up going to the recovery room, worked in the PACU for a little bit. To me, that's one of the holy grails of working as a nurse. It was incredible. The nurses, they were incredible down there. And then from there, I went to go work in the operating room as a circulating nurse. Did that for about 2 years. And then in 2023, 24, somewhere roughly in between there, I decided to take my endeavors and to do NCLEX coaching and mentoring full time.
Wow. Yeah. And I know you wrote a book. It's called Conquer It, The Journey to Passing the NCLEX. And you work with people one-on-one, I'm assuming over Zoom, probably, over video. And then you also have a 7-day on-demand NCLEX course to help people prepare. So do you feel like the one-on-one coaching is absolutely necessary for most people? Or do you feel like some can do the course, read the book, and the one-on-one coaching isn't absolutely necessary for them to get into the mindset and do the preparation and be ready when they're going to sit down and, like you say, conquer it?
Right. Well, just like I said, earlier in the podcast, first-time test takers, 91% of them pass on the first time. And that's incredible. Believe it or not, I've had first-time test takers, seek me out just because their anxiety was so high. And they were just like, I don't want to fail. I don't care what I have to do. I want you to guide me because I don't want to fail this exam. And I'm like, cool, I got you. But that's 91%. But I'm geared towards the other 9% statistically based off of last year. And do I believe people need coaching? No, I don't believe that you need it. Not everybody needs it. I take that back. I did end up getting coaching once I couldn't figure it out after the third time. But do people need coaching? No, the book can suffice. The course can suffice. But if you want to understand what you're truly doing wrong and you're, as I say, doing the definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. If you're one of those people, that's where I say, I really think that you should inquire about coaching.
Right. And then as the exam evolves, I've known a number of people who were involved in actually doing the item writing for the NCLEX, right? So that's a special skill in and of itself. I wouldn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole myself. However, as it changes, and it has to change with what's going on out in the world, we have to also be prepared. My understanding is that I think, if I've heard correctly, there are starting to be questions about cannabis and cannabis nursing, because that's actually like a thing. And eventually, as the FDA approves psychedelics in medicine and the treatment of PTSD and depression, there's going to be questions in that area. So how do you personally, Kevin, stay abreast of what's happening with the exam as new items start to get added and new topics start to kind of come into the fold that were never on the test before?
Right. So another disclaimer, while I was in the service, I was a master instructor. So I've been teaching since 2015, and I was a surge tech instructor for about 3.5 years. And one of the things that we did was test writing not NCLEX questions, but writing test questions for our program. And so when I learned about the item writing, I got really happy about it because that's I was jiving with that. And so but I've never been an NCLEX test writer. And now that I have a course and I coach it, it's a conflict of interest. And obviously I can't do it because ethically that's wrong to do. Mm-hmm. But I personally have not seen, at least on a lot of the major NCLEX reviews, specifically anything about cannabis. Now, what I do see is where they talk about holistic nursing, even specifically like on these reviews, they don't say anything about COVID. They'll talk about respiratory distress, which COVID would be considered respiratory distress. Mm-hmm. And so I personally have not seen that. But the way that I do, really keep up with it is I am on the NCSBN's website. Like it's going out of style. I get on that thing almost every day, like I would get on TikTok. And, I subscribe to their mail letters. I actually went to the NCSBN's NCLEX, was a semi-annual summit. It was back in September and, learned a lot about how case studies are working and what is, coming down the pipeline, from the National Council, to essentially let people know like, hey, this is what's coming and you need to be prepared for it.
Mm-hmm. So you're trying your best to keep abreast of what's happening every day. And I'm sure students are anxious about what the changes are, but we also just have to trust ourselves, I guess, to a large extent that, based on the way the questions are structured, like you said, there's always two answers that are absolutely wrong. And there's two that could be right. And there's the one that is right. So when we go through nursing school, they're always talking about critical thinking. You hear that term so much, you kind of want to bang your head against a wall. But critical thinking is kind of where it's at. And you have to be able to think through any scenario. And if you think about it, when you're in the clinical space, things are going to happen that you haven't encountered before, and you have to think it through. You go back to your basics. So is that the same mindset that you need for the exam that you bring to your clinical practice? Even if you're approaching something that you've never seen before, you just kind of go back to the basics and think things through critically?
Absolutely. So like on the clinical standpoint, I hope that, you have, points of reference, AKA, a charge nurse or, a preceptor or a nurse that's been on your floor longer than you to, help you give you perspective and lead you in the right direction. Now with the NCLEX itself, when you don't have critical thinking, you have to go back to the basics, because what a lot of people try to do is that they try to skip and they forget their firm foundation, which is content. So if somebody presents diabetic ketoacidosis to you, and I'm like, okay, let's go back to the beginning. So you're right here in the middle. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's see who can get DKA. What is DKA? Mm-hmm. What does it look like? Who can get it? Okay, now that we know who can get it, what is it going to present to you? Okay, boom. Now we have DKA right here in the middle. Now that you know who can get it and what it presents like, and you're here, what are the steps that you need to do in order to alleviate that? Put those steps into practice. And then once you put them into practice, now you're going to turn around and say, did the action steps that I do, did they work? That is critical thinking. When you break it down for somebody like that, they're just like, wow, that makes so much sense. And I say, because you're trying to rush the process. You're trying to start in the middle to get to the end versus you have to be at the beginning in order to get to the end. Mm-hmm. And that's how I explain critical thinking. And it is very needed because nurses are getting more responsibility. People are getting older. People are getting sicker. People are getting more complex. So you have to realize the amount of responsibility that you are getting as a licensed practical nurse and a registered nurse. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to understand those things so you can, take care of your patients properly.
Right. So for people who come to you when they have anxiety, when they have, kind of the lack of self-esteem to approach the test in a way where they feel like they're going to be able to do it, they're going to be able to conquer it. And their mind, what I remember from myself, there's just sort of this muddle that happens based on the anxiety, based on the stress and the uncertainty and the lack of, basically trust in yourself that you can think these things through. So aside from the studying, aside from the practice testing, aside from, those particular skills, what are things people need to do for themselves in order to kind of be in the space where they can approach their studies and then approach the actual exam in a way that's sane, in a way that's balanced, and in a way where they can feel confident and calm? Because that sounds like those are such important pieces of being able to approach it competently and ultimately, of course, be successful, which is what we're after.
Right. One of the very first things that I have anybody do when they want to meet with me is time management. I need to know it. And I tell them I'm a very intrusive person. I want to know everything that's going on with you from the moment that God allows for your eyes to wake up to the moment that he closes them. I want to know what you're doing, because if you don't have an understanding of where your time is going, how can you study effectively? And I was like, I've worked with people who are single mothers who have 4 children. I worked with a young lady who, young, early 20s, lives with her parents, doesn't have a job. I've worked with single fathers. I've worked with, moms who are stay at home, who, have life altering experiences happen in the middle of our coaching sessions. But the biggest thing that I tell you, I'm just like, all right, what do we have control over? We all have the same 24 hours in a day. Now, how are we going to allocate them? You tell me you've been studying, you study for 4 hours, but what's the quality of that studying? Are you telling me that you did 3,000 questions, but did you do 3,000 questions over the span of 6 months? Did you do them back to back? Did you read your rationale? Did you go back and look up the content that you didn't understand? But it all stems from time management, the accountability that goes in on of what you do and what you haven't done. You have to be honest with yourself. And I tell them, you can lie all you want, but when you fill out this form and this tracker, these numbers are not going to lie to me. And you have to be honest with yourself, because I'm not taking this exam for you. I wouldn't want to take this exam for you. So you have to be honest with yourself, your time management, and be accountable for what you do and for what you don't do.
Right. And then, once we pass, and we're all happy when we do, what's your view on kind of the lifelong learning that happens once you become a nurse? And how does your experience of nursing school, studying for the NCLEX, taking the exam, getting licensed, maybe moving on to become certified in emergency nursing, or to get your, whatever certification you want to pursue once you're out of school and you're licensed and out in the world, how does that reflect on your broader journey, as you move forward? Because, a lot of our careers are long, 20, right, 30, 40, 50 years. So there's a lot of learning ahead of us, and it doesn't stop once you get that license in your hand.
Right. Actually, the NCLEX is just a flash in the pan. It's there and then it's gone. That's why they tell you to prepare as much as you can for it. That way you don't have to take this exam again. But if you do take the exam again, it's okay. It's okay if you take that exam. Now, as you prepare going forward, we are lifelong learners. One of the questions I always like to ask is, what type of nurse do you want to be? And they'll be like, someone tell me psych, or someone tell me MP, someone tell me CRNA or flight nursing. And I'm like, okay, so the same process that I'm teaching you right now is going to be the same structured process that you would want to do as you pursue that additional aspect of nursing. So you take this process on how you study for NCLEX. Now you're going to go and you want to be flight nurse. Okay, you know that you need to go to the ICU. They like ER nurses, but they want the en route critical care. So you need to get to an ICU. You need to be able to, you have to get those things down. You got to know vent management. You got to know hemodynamics. You got to know drips, titratable drips, especially. You have to know, I already said hemodynamics, but you have to know all those things, so you take the same process. And then guess what? Now you want to be a CCRN. You take the same process, same studying technique, go and take your CCRN. Now you want to be a certified flight nurse. Okay, same concept. Or if you want to be a CRNA, same concept. So I always, even though we are right here, give them little breadcrumbs to think about as they go forward and what they can strive for once they have this license in hand. And I also let them know that it is baby steps. Just like how it could take you 30 days or 45 days to prepare for this NCLEX, it's going to take you, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years for you to prepare to get to that next level of nursing.
Mhm.
You have to be able to understand that you have to take your time with that.
Right. And have you yourself sat for any certification exams?
I have not.
Mm-hmm.
I had, my young dreams of wanting to be a CRNA,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I took the ICU route. And then, I just got burnt out, and I realized that anesthesia was me when I was 19, first joined the military, was a hospital corpsman, and I was all bright eyed and bushy tailed. But the older that I got, I realized that wasn't a passion for me anymore. So I was just like, I could leave the ICU and be okay with that. And then I was like, well, maybe I can do PACU. Well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I can do, be a certified OR nurse. But then I was just like, I really love teaching. And I was like, well, maybe I can do the MSN route. And so, I kind of just floated on that. Then I thought about, acute care nurse practitioner. And I was like, no. And I was just like, I really love the education.
Mm.
And so I never got certified in anything. So I just completely pursued the education route.
Right. Yeah. And, I've pursued my own areas in coaching as well and have not done any clinical certifications myself. And, I have to be super honest and say that I still carry fear of standardized tests. It's something that just is still with me. And, what's really funny is back in the day, like 15, 16 years ago, for a period of time, I got a license in Texas for various reasons I won't go into. So I was living in Massachusetts, but I got a license in Texas. And Texas involved a nursing jurisprudence test, which to me was killer. But the lucky thing was that it was actually an open book test where you could actually have, I don't know, it was like this 500-page PDF or something of all the jurisprudence. And it might be one of the only states that has this sort of exam. And that exam almost killed me. I felt like the stress of that exam was so intense for me because I needed this license to do what I needed to do. And it was a bear for me, preparing for it, actually going through the stress. And I passed, I think, by the skin of my teeth. So I still carry this fear. And
yeah,
I'm curious in terms of carrying fear, like when you fail the NCLEX or you failed a standardized test like this, it can affect your self-esteem. So what do you tell people who you're working with who've failed once, twice, whatever, 3 times? How do they recover, I guess, psycho-emotionally from this experience and not let it color how they feel about themselves in terms of their self-esteem as clinicians? Like, what do you do to move past this experience?
Well, one of the biggest things that I tell them is look at who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was exactly in your shoes. The biggest thing I love about being a coach and a mentor, specifically for NCLEX, is that I'm relevant. Because a lot of people, when they get their license, they're just like, I got my license, flash in the pan, and I am gone. Like, I don't ever want to think about this exam again. Good luck to everybody else that's taking it. But I show myself as an example. I openly tell people on social media that I have failed this exam, on top of the fact that I'll even show them my candidate performance reports.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, none of y'all would have known that. And I'm a good nurse. You would have never known that. But the whole point is to show you that your failures do not dictate who you are and what you are going to become. So I'm one of those people, hey, we punch fear right in the face. You get I give people, you get a whole 24 hours to have a pity party. I like on hour 25, don't come to me crying. You better come to me ready with you better come to me ready to take action because I want results and no excuses. So when you get that candidate performance report, now I'm getting real Navy right now. You hear my tone change.
I hear that.
Now, I was like, when you get that candidate performance report, you need to do a self-audit. What did I do? What did I not do that was not well? Now that goes back to your time management. That goes back to your accountability. That goes back to what areas of my studying did I not do well on? Did I only do 20 questions at a time? Did I take an hour to do 4 questions and then take a nap on the couch? Because that's what I did when I was unsuccessful. Was I accountable for the things that I did and I didn't do? Like, you go down this list. If at any of those points that you're just like, I know that I didn't do that, then that's an area you need to fix.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take coaching for me to tell you that. But if you want me to tell you that, I will tell you that. And I tell people that often, at least 3 times a week when I'm on TikTok. So that's probably the biggest thing that I like to tell people is you have to get out of your own way, because it's only you that's going to take this exam. You have to get out of your own way. I like to call that getting off the beach.
Mm-hmm. And I think the way you've been talking for the last minute or 2 minutes is why you call yourself the boot nurse, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct.
So this goes back to the idea of boot camp and sort of that military mindset, and you have to kind of kick your own butt, right?
Absolutely. It stemmed from, I was active duty in the military when I started this whole, NCLEX coaching journey. I actually got my nursing license and got my nursing degree while I was active duty in the military. And a lot of people were just like, how did you do that? I'm just like, I had really great leadership and it took a lot of patience. There's sometimes I wanted to give up, but I'm glad that I didn't give up on myself.
Yeah.
But it started with the uniform. As in, people recognize the fact that, he has military boots, he has his uniform. So think about military boot camp. Boots are very recognizable by people, civilians, non-military individuals. But then there's a saying that we have in the military where we call people boots, meaning you're coming directly from boot camp. So, basic trainees or boots don't know anything about anything when it comes to nursing. And I correlate that to, we learn new things every day. I was in the Navy for 16 and a half years, and I don't know everything. I know a lot of things, but I don't know everything. And even as a nurse, we're all not created equally because we are all specialized in different areas. Some people in research, some people on the clinical side. So I like to let people know, like, hey, it's okay for you to learn new things every day. That's what's going to make you a better nurse. But we're not all created equally. And that's, the other portion of that as well.
Right. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the mentorship you're offering out there in the world. And people can find you at thebootnurse.com. And you're the Boot Nurse on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And you're also on LinkedIn. And all those links will be in the show notes. And, before we go, I always have 4 questions I ask all my guests, and they don't really have anything to do specifically with what we've been talking about, but they're also revealing, and they have a lot to do with just the way you approach the world and approach your life. So do you feel willing to play along with a little lightning round?
What's really funny is that I've listened to so many of your episodes and I was trying to be prepared for this, and I don't even think I'm prepared for it, but I want to do this. So let's do it.
All right. Well, spontaneity works. So here we go. So of all the things there are to understand about human nature, about life, what is something you'd really, really like to understand?
I want to understand why we're here.
Tell me more about that.
Like, I'm a very faith-based person. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And, I'm very much diving into my faith. And as I try to understand, I don't understand. And I want to be able to understand. It's just like, why did God want to create us in our image, in his image, and have us here to do the good, the bad, and the ugly? Why do these things happen? Why do they continuously happen? When is he coming back? And, it's just one of those things that I've always wanted to try to understand, but I'm okay not understanding it. But it's I don't know. It's kind of one of those toss-ups.
That question remains for you.
Yeah, and it's an exciting, in my opinion, it's an exciting question and an exciting answer to not have an answer to.
Yeah, it's the mystery.
Yeah, it is. And it's a good mystery. And I'm 100% okay with that.
Cool. I appreciate that. All right. So is there somebody out there, could be someone living, could be someone who's no longer with us, could be a really famous person, or maybe someone from your personal life who is just one of those touchstones for you, one of those people you just really admire, who just mean a whole lot to you?
This may sound cliche. It's not cliche, but Jesus.
Okay. Tell me.
I've had my encounters and running in life, just growing up and not feeling like I had, a lot of the opportunities that other people had. A lot of people have it a lot worse than me. And I understand that. I'm not naive to that. I live in a great country, despite of whatever people say, what's going on nowadays. We live in a very, very, very free country. And I've seen places where they are not with my military service. So I always, it's just like, I want to sit and just be like, hey, how am I doing? Am I doing good? Is there anything you need me to change? I know I can never be perfect like you, but, like have those encounters, just like, how am I doing? How are you doing? How are you doing watching over all of people that are walking with you, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I would love to see Jesus again, because I saw Jesus in a dream, and it was an incredible feeling that I can't wait to feel again.
Oh, well, thanks for sharing that. Okay.
Thank you.
And is there a book, a film, something out there in the broader culture, human culture, that has really impacted you in a way that just you keep going back to it over and over?
I'm not going to say, so there's this movie I've only seen fully one time, and it took me a long time to get through it. And I've seen clips that have popped up numerous times, but it's Saving Private Ryan. The first time I ever saw that is when I first joined the service, and it took me a very long time, a very long time to get through the invasion of Normandy. Yeah. It took me, that's about a 45-minute, that section alone is about 30 to 45 minutes. And it took me a very long time just to get past that. It's very, if you ever want to understand what war was like back then, that is a movie that'll do it.
Yeah.
And it gave me a lot of perspective about human life. Robert Kiyosaki said one day, if those that don't know who Robert Kiyosaki is, he's the author of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series, but he said that war is the lowest level of humanity. And no matter who we are, no matter what we're fighting for as, men, it's a horrific thing to go to war with another person. And it gave me a lot of perspective on how important, it is to continue to love one another, but then also to come to the table to talk about things to where we don't have to go to that. I've been to war, and I that's just my perspective on, like, we can do better. We can do better as humans, and, given the stake that where we are now, and, in 2025 and the things that are happening other places in the world, I wish for those things to get better for all those people that are involved. But that is one movie, man, that really sticks with me, to where I give people perspective. I was just like, you can either stay on this beach or you can get off. And, I use that as a way, even in the intro in my book, like, you can stay on the beach and surely die, which is a metaphor. You can stay here, not making progress, or you can run through the gunfire. You can run through the explosions. You can run through the smoke, AKA the world and everything it's going to throw at you, with the chances of progressing. Slow progression is still progression. And so that's definitely one movie that sticks with me 100%. Thank you for those questions.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah. Last one, actually, is if you were named king of the world tomorrow and you had ultimate power and you could do everything for everyone to make their lives better, what would be the first thing you would want to change to make people's lives better?
Isn't there an old saying where it says absolute power corrupts absolutely?
That's true.
That's true, right? My biggest one, I think, would be, for the fact that we are healthcare providers, is there should be free healthcare for everyone.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Equal and, top notch, super duper top tier, as my friend would say, healthcare for everyone. There should be no reason ever on anybody's planet, I don't care what planet you're on, that healthcare should be subpar in any way to subsidize for anybody's pockets.
Spoken like a true nurse. Thank you for that.
There.
I appreciate
Yes.
it. Well, Kevin, I really appreciate you being here. I really want people to go to thebootnurse.com and to check you out on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And please, if you know someone who has an NCLEX exam pending and you know that they need help, or you have nursing students in your lives and you want to make sure they're well prepared, please send them over to the Boot Nurse. And I really appreciate you being here. I hope some people come your way. And thanks for being out there and supporting new nurses who really need your help so that they can get out there and become part of the nursing workforce. I appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, allowing me, to be on your podcast, and congratulations on, 500 episodes. I know I'm episode 511, but congratulate. 500 episodes is no feat. That is a long time, and a lot of guests that you talk to, really just continuously trying to better our profession as nurses. So, once again, congratulations to you, and shout out for everything that you do. It's incredible.
Thanks, my friend. All right, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nurse Keith Show. Remember, the show notes are at nursekeith.com or on the app where you're listening on your device. And I hope you feel uplifted and empowered from this episode. Please head over to the Boot Nurse at thebootnurse.com. Check out Kevin on social media and please let him know that you heard him, and please send people his way. Please consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com, or just share the show with anyone who you think might enjoy it or get something out of it. We are proud members of the Health Podcast Network at healthpodcastnetwork.com, and we are produced by the inimitable Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. And I'll leave you with this quote by the musician Robert Fripp: "May my living honor my parents. May my living repay the debt of my existence." Be well, dig deep, seek joy, keep in touch. And this is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Kevin Gibson of the Boot Nurse saying arrivederci from
San Antonio, Texas.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks to everyone for listening. And we'll catch you, of course, on the proverbial flip side.